Okay, if you could just take your seats, please.
I used to work, but the stroke stopped that. Well, I couldn't remember the keys because there were alarms and everything, and you had a code to get through, and I just couldn't remember the keys. So I had to wait for everybody to come to work before I could get up to the office.
And then, yeah, I remember them coming in and saying, "Oh, look, she's had a brain, massive brain hemorrhage."
In terms of the ones who were involved who had the stroke, so the two youngest ones were both in their 30s. One was actually playing rugby for one of the clubs here. Big, fit boy, slim as, still is, and unbelievable that he got hit.
And I must admit, prior to my first dose of cancer, I did look at a reasonable amount of money going out every month and thinking, oh, really, surely if anything happens to me, I'll be in a situation where I'll get ACC or I'll get support or I'll get something, but of course that's not the case.
Sovereign was amazing, actually. They, when I was trying really hard to go back to work right at the start, and I shouldn't have, and I knew I was still quite sick, but I was determined not to be letting my business partner down. My account manager said, no, you're not actually able to.
The reality is you don't get back to normal at all. You get back to a new normal, but that is actually quite different from what normal was. So, and most people probably don't recognise that.
I actually had the luxury, because I had the insurance, I had the luxury to look around for what I wanted to do, which led me to wanting to work, to study. Thank goodness Asteron is still, providing for me.
The income insurance was, invaluable. I can't even begin to say how handy it was, and particularly for someone like myself, where there is no other source of income. So I don't have a partner or a husband who's saying, well, that's all right, dear, you carry on being sick and I'll just pay the mortgage.
Yeah, I honestly can't think of where we would be if we hadn't have got that income protection insurance.
Well, we wouldn't have attempted to build this house without it. There's no way. We'd be in a much smaller house somewhere.
So essentially what having this income insurance has allowed me to do is to keep living absolutely as I had before.
Welcome. I'm Peter Nielsen, the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Council, and those short vignettes are a wonderful reminder of the great work that the industry actually does. That $1 billion worth of claims each year over the last 5 years, but basically being there to help people in their moment of need is the core business of our sector, and it's always nice to have a reminder of how much that is valued by the people who have to make a claim. About 5 years ago, the predecessor organisation of the FSC funded some work from Massey University on underinsurance in New Zealand. The major conclusion that came out of that report was the one area where most people were vulnerable and were least likely to have coverage was in relation to income protection insurance. In fact, that most people had, for example, insurance on their home, most people had insurance on their car, but by and large, most people did not have insurance against their income, the most likely and most valuable asset that they actually held. Out of that exercise, the industry responded to those messages. It basically said, we'll go out there and we will find ways of making policies more acceptable and more accessible and easier to understand. We will, as an industry, start talking about all the different forms of income protection insurance under one heading called income protection insurance, rather than using that simply to refer to one of those various means by which people are helped when illness means that they can't continue to have an income. And as a consequence of that, whereas when the Massey survey was done, only about 1 in 5 of New Zealand families actually had income protection cover. That has now moved so that it's about 1 in 4. We have a lot further to go, but one of the reasons why we have a lot further to go is we found that many people do not understand the circumstances that would require assistance. And very much, even though we have multiple ways we can deal with that problem, none of us are likely to take that step unless we actually are fully aware of the likelihood of that event occurring. So that's why we did the update of that material, which you'll hear about this morning. With 1,000 New Zealand families a week being impacted by illness that will be for 3 months or more, that will prevent employment, this is a very serious issue across the whole of the country. But most of us, of course, don't necessarily want to contemplate the possibility of having a long-term illness that will prevent us from being employed. So it is our job, in fact, to make sure that there is a conversation about our vulnerability and what we can do about it. This morning, we'll hear the updated statistics, the material about how do we measure who is vulnerable and how vulnerable they are, which will make it possible for us to have better conversations with the people who need to be protected. We'll talk about people who work in the front line with people who actually have the devastation of a health crisis that often becomes also a financial crisis. We'll also be talking about what we can do about addressing those issues so that people have a better idea of where they stand and what they need to do in order to be able to deal with those issues. None of this would have been possible without the support of the FSC members, and a number of them have generously also sponsored this day's event and other attachments to this particular program. Companies like Partners Life, Fidelity Life, Cigna, Asteron, Sovereign and the reinsurer Score have all agreed to put money additional to their membership fee in order to make these activities possible. And we thank them sincerely for that work and that contribution, because without that support this event would not have been possible and nor would have been the research that was done to back it up. Okay, so this morning is not the beginning of the end, it's the beginning of a very good program. In a couple of weeks we will have a website that will contain much of the material that's here today. We will also be providing advisory material in terms of a booklet in respect of these circumstances, so people who need to advise, whether you're a social worker, Partners Life, whether you're in the industry, to help people know what their rights and responsibilities and opportunities are if they do have all agreed with long-term illness. And also, between about January and about March of next year, we will be doing quite extensive online advertising to the people who are most vulnerable, but also will have the capability of actually making a difference in this area by taking steps to prepare for this morning is not an event that they don't want to happen, but they do need to be a very good program. So, with no further ado, I will ask our website Emma to speak. She is our MC for the day. She's also going to be the interviewer. We want the program is to be quick moving, but also have the opportunity to ask questions. And so we thought we would have an MC. And in terms of people who would be eligible and credible in that role, somebody who actually has experience covering these issues. Not always necessarily loving us to go but basically credibility about the issues. And so therefore we'll find a way to do that and accept that role. So this area by taking steps to prepare.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you here. My first job is unfortunately a little bit boring. It's to go through the housekeeping. And so I have a number of things here to run through with you. And by coincidence, as you do, I was watching a video a couple of nights ago about the earthquake in Mexico City that killed 20,000 people in the 80s. So the first thing I did today was look at where the exit was. So if there is an emergency, the announcement system will activate. There's a siren, and an announcement comes through and says, please evacuate the building, this is a fire alarm. The red flashing lights under the ceilings. Leave the building immediately via the nearest exits. And exit to level 0. Do not use the lifts. Walk, don't run. Evacuate to the front of the quad. and anyone with mobility issues needs to wait until able-bodied people have left first. Toilets, there are toilets on level 0 just outside the store here, and please no food or drink besides water bottles allowed with plating, and no photography without proper approval from the public. Please silence your mobile phones, and during today there'll be opportunities to ask questions, but they will all be via text. So the number to text will come up, but if you want to take it down now, it's 021 902 850, 021 902 850. And I also need to warn you that this session is being filmed. Just one change to the program, and that is that Terry Doran of the Heart Foundation has kindly stepped in for Kim Arcus, so that is a different name from your program. And just lastly, I'd like to thank the sponsors again: Astor on Life, Sovereign, Cigna, Fidelity Life, and Partners Life. Now that brings me to something far more interesting, which is to introduce our first speaker, Grant McInman, who's the manager of Horizon Research. So please welcome Grant.
Thank you, Diana.
Welcome.
So all I've got to do now is make sure I can drive this thing. Okay, so where's it go? Yeah, try that. Right, so what we're going to look at is the results, top-line results of a survey we did in June and July this year. And also it links to some work we also did in 2012 for the Financial Services Council. So we've been looking at what the gap is like for a little bit period of time. The survey itself, and I won't bore you too much with that, we was about 2,500 people across the New Zealand population, 18 years or of age or over. So we're dealing with the adult population. We've got a margin of error around 2%. It's weighted to match New Zealand demographics for the population 18 plus, and we looked at what's the level of New Zealanders' exposure to accident, to long-term sickness and mental illness that prevent them actually working for 3 to 6 months or 6 months or more. We looked at getting a benchmark for current income protection insurance in comparison with life and other insurance companies, and as Peter alluded to in his introduction, there's a huge difference between the two, and it hasn't changed. It has changed a bit, but it hasn't changed all that much from the work that was done by Massey University. We're looking at also getting a better understanding of how New Zealanders perceive their vulnerability to long-term illness that prevents them from working, and that is really to allow us to start to communicate to people. And as when we go through the presentation, you'll see that once they understand, they're more likely to do something about protecting themselves, but they really don't understand so much at this stage. And then we looked at information gaps that require addressing to try and increase income protection uptake. So first thing, and we didn't ask this first in the survey, but we thought it was an interesting one to put up first on the presentation. We asked respondents what they thought was their most valuable asset over a lifetime, and 45% of those who are working tell us it's their home. And then you start talking to them about, okay, so what if you earn $50,000 a year over 40 years of employment? Your earnings are going to be about $2 million before tax, and they suddenly change their minds. Okay, so they haven't considered that. They don't consider necessarily their income is an asset as such. Okay, they're not thinking quite in those terms. So suddenly it changes. You can see there at the top, my home goes from 45 to 29, and my lifetime income goes from 24 up to 46. There's a big switch around. The rest of it doesn't change so much. There'll be some people whose assets are much bigger than their income. There'll be some people whose assets are only in their home. There'll be some people who have other things as well. But I know my boat doesn't figure very strongly in there. So what do they currently have? So this is one of the first things we asked them in the survey. So what do they currently have? Out of every 10 New Zealand households, eight of them are going to have vehicle insurance. This just tells you how many cars and motorbikes and trucks there are on the road. And 7 are going to have someone with household contents insurance. 6 are going to have someone with home insurance. And that's about right. It's about 60-odd% of people actually own the home they live in. 6 will have someone with life insurance. And this is more than one person in the household will have this. 4 will have someone with medical insurance, but only 3 will have someone with income protection insurance. And if you think that 60-odd% of the houses are owned, properties are owned, and that's one thing that they think is really significant to them in terms of their assets at the moment, that's not a lot of cover. So we're actually looking at around 1.5 million employed 18 to 64-year-olds who don't have income protection insurance. In general, they've got, those who do have got their income's about 35% above average. Their personal income's around 58% above average, so they're likely to be the main earner. They are more likely than average to be in, strangely, in skilled trades and trained services occupations. You often find in some other work we do that that's not the case, that it's more even across the population. They're more likely to be in households that are single person, couple only, or 2 parents, so they're less likely to be 1-parent households, which is quite likely to be an income issue. And they're younger than average, and they're more likely than average to be aged 25 to 44. And you can see the percent of each age group. The red thing is no one in my household has this, and as they get older, that drops down, which you might expect. Okay, but it's mainly clustered in that area in that 25 to 44 year group. That's the blue bars. Are they likely to be off work for 6 months or more as a result of an accident or an illness? Well, more of them think they're going to be off work because of an accident. And if you work in forestry, that might well be the case, but in fact, the respondent figures tell us that someone in a household is 2.2 times more likely to have someone unable to work for 6 months as a result of a serious illness than a serious accident. And when you look at just employed 18 to 64-year-olds, it's 1.8. So we're about twice. They're twice as likely. The unemployment, the incidence, you can see on the charts on the right. So 39% have been through a period of employment for unemployment for 3 to 6 months, and 37% now have had a period of unemployment for 6 months or more. Now, the red bar is what happened in 2012, and you see that just about all the incidence of all these things has increased since 2012. So the blue bars are 2015. Come down to serious illness, 18% of households, this is households, not individuals, households, 18% of households have had someone experience a serious illness that meant they were unable to work for 3 to 6 months, and the same proportion has had a serious illness that means they were unable to work for more than 6 months. The main earner, serious illness, is slightly lower than for households overall. And we, for the first time in 2015, we didn't measure it in 2012, but we asked about mental illness as well, so serious mental condition. And they tended to occur where there was also a serious physical illness. So about 22% of serious mental conditions, which then resulted in an inability to work, occurred without a serious physical illness, but the rest occurred together. So we're not talking about changing the accident to serious illness ratio, but it's a different perspective on this. We weren't at all sure whether or not that had been included in the 2012 work, but it doesn't appear to have been included in serious illness as far as respondents were concerned. You can see there's a difference there. The fourth line down on the table, a serious illness that meant you were unable to work for more than 6 months, went from 14% in 2012 to 18% in 2015. It's quite a big jump. Right, so how do you support yourself if you are actually in a serious illness situation? We asked about the sickness, or now called job seeker support benefit. 64% overall are aware of that. You're going to be more aware of it if you're employed, and you're a little less aware of it if you've got income protection insurance, but it's around 64%. 30% thought they would be eligible for it. You notice down there's an awful lot that are not sure. So over half of people who are employed are unsure whether they'd be eligible for this. 51% however, don't know that their eligibility would be affected by their partner's income. Right, just a reminder, if you've got questions, please text them. There's the number again. Okay. All good? Right. So then there's ACC. So what do they think ACC covers? Well, 20% think it covers illness. So it's illness other than illness caused by long-term workplace exposure, which is what ACC doesn't in fact cover. And 44% think correctly that it does cover that illness. So, okay, so they're correct about that, but there's a big gap there. There's a big group of people who don't understand that. And that means that they could well be vulnerable because they're expecting maybe to get cover that isn't in place. So what is the vulnerability of people? We asked them whether they could, for how long they could continue to pay their current household expenses and maintain their standard of living after their sick leave and annual leave had run out. So how long could they go for? And in 2012, there were two things happening. One, we saw that a lot of people couldn't last more than a week, and certainly by 4 weeks, 50-odd% couldn't maintain their standard of living and pay their current household expenses, okay? So, and they also told us at that stage that they were starting to retire debt. So things were happening in 2012 is a little bit different. And part of that was coming out of the global financial crisis. They'd gone through, surviving through that, and now they were saying, oh, I need to get rid of some debt. So we expected things to have changed a bit, but it hasn't really. And so if you look at that, you've got about 18% who can't survive more than a week. You've got about 33% who can't survive more than 3 weeks. And by the time you get to 4 weeks, you've still got 53% sitting in there, yeah? But then it drops away. So after 4 weeks, same sort of pattern we saw in 2012. After 4 weeks, they can't survive anymore. They can't pay, well, they can survive, but they can't continue to pay their household expenses, and they can't maintain their standard of living. Over half, around about half. The other thing that changed, I think, in comparison with 2012 was that the tail was longer. So when it gets out towards 6 to 12 months or more, it's got a little stronger. A few more can actually survive through that period. But fundamentally, we're looking at around, after 4 weeks, around half of them are gone. Now, what happens if you then ask them, well, what about if you were going to pay your mortgage and rent, even if you had to stop paying other things, what happens? It's the same story. 47 can't pay their mortgage or rent after 4 weeks. So if you're a bank and you're sitting there looking at your clients and going, oh, we've just discovered they've got a serious illness, not going to be able to work, you'd be a bit worried, okay? In the average household, we also asked them how much are they going to, do they actually need to survive, to cope with loss of income involving illness as a result of the illness, and it's $683 a week on average. That's working on brackets of income, but it's an average around $680, which is sort of similar to what people think they will actually need in retirement. So it's just, but that's just added on. If I lose my income here, I need at least $680 in addition to any other income that might be coming into the house. And when you say to them, okay, if you did, so now we've told you all these things about, because we basically, the way we work the surveys is we ask them a lot of information about how they feel about these things, how they perceive things, and then we'll often show them or give them information about things and see whether that changes, So once they've had the time to actually think through what they would do and what the implications are and what actually the incidence of illness is, suddenly you get more people who are going to say, oh, I think I actually need to do something about this. So when you tell them, you get there's an additional around 78,000, nearly 80,000 people who would actually go, oh, I really need to investigate this and maybe go and buy some income protection or get some income protection for me personally, get some income protection. If that happened, we'd be up to around, including some people who are thinking now that they should do it, we're up around 45% of households would have someone with income protection insurance, but it's going from around 34% now. Okay, it's not a huge jump, and it still means that 55% don't. So what triggers it? People telling them that it's a good idea is the largest one. You see there, 46% are saying that if it was recommended by what's been triggered, these are the people who actually had personal income protection insurance or trauma or disability or critical risk or whatever it's called. 46% say it was recommended to them by a financial advisor, a bank or an insurance broker. Right. There is some effect of experience in there. About 30% have been affected by, done it as a result of have experienced either their own experience or experiences of a friend or family member, but it's very strongly about people actually recommending them, making the case for it, if you like. And 35% had arranged their income protection insurance directly with an insurance company, 30% with a bank. The banks are becoming very important in this, and 18% with an independent advisor overall. And do they think it's going to be easy to do it? Well, generally they think it's difficult to arrange adequate and affordable. When we rolled those two together, but from other questions in the survey, it's probably more likely to be the affordability. That's the issue. People don't necessarily understand how much they would need to pay. Where there's been other income protection insurance in a household, they've got a much better handle on that. Where they're thinking about they may actually buy income protection insurance in the next 12 months, they've got a much better handle on what it's actually going to cost them, what it's worth. But where they don't, where they haven't actually thought about it, they think it might well be difficult, probably because of affordability. But generally, you're talking here, you've got, what, 42% who think it's going to be difficult or very difficult to actually arrange adequate and affordable income protection insurance. So there's a task for the industry, I suppose. People know that their home is the most valuable asset, or think their home is the most valuable asset, but then you talk to them about the incidents and what's the effects and get them to think about it, and suddenly that changes. We've got a very low incidence at the moment of income protection insurance. 2 to 3 out of 10 households only have got someone with income protection insurance. Compare that with vehicle insurance. We insure our vehicles, we don't insure our income. This will be a familiar story to a lot of people in the industry, I suspect. Most people severely underestimate the likelihood of being off work for a long period caused by sickness. So you've got 60% who think it's going to be accident that's going to cause them to be off work, not illness. And that's not really the case. In reality, it's twice as likely they'll be off as a result of illness, as reported to us by the respondents, okay, in terms of the incidents that are in their household. And many people don't understand that social welfare or ACC may not be able to help them, depending on the cause of the illness and depending on their partner's income, they may not be able to get us other assistance. They also don't necessarily understand how financially vulnerable they are. And as a result of not understanding that, they do actually become quite vulnerable if they have a long-term illness that prevents them working. So, as Peter said at the start, around 55,000 households, 1,000 a week, experience a sickness event that meant someone's able to work for 3 months or more. And only 1 in every 8 households where there's a serious illness preventing employment for 6 months or more had income protection insurance in place when it happened, which is quite scary really. That's quite small. So, questions? Do we have any questions, Tim?
I've got a couple of questions for you.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, we do, Diana. The
Pardon?
question was whether the slides have been made available.
Sorry, beg your pardon?
Whether the slides will be made available to attendees.
Will the slides be made available? And I know that there's a real lack of understanding among the public about income protection insurance, and I quite often, as a journalist, to read the barometer of what people are thinking, I go onto the Trade Me forums, and I saw a thread in there of a woman who'd gone on and said, "Help! We need to get income protection insurance. My husband's just had a heart attack," and so most of you will know that that means actually he's closing the stable door after the horse has bolted because it was too late. And yet that was the belief by people that that they had to get some insurance and they could get it then.
Yeah, Diana, that actually popped up in some of the comments in the research, that people were saying, oh yes, I had an illness, so I had to go and get income protection insurance, but as you say, it's too late by then.
Yes. Look, for you, with the research, what was the single most important or single most interesting thing that came out of it for you personally?
I think personally is that the thing that's scariest is the huge gap. The fact that there's so few people who have insured or have any way of protecting their income and can't last after 4 weeks. I mean, if you look at that, and I've been in business for a long time, and I've worked in a bank, so from a banking perspective, you'd be going, really? Why aren't we getting more of our customers into this? Because it's actually helping us out as well. But it's the sheer gap. The fact that we've only got a small proportion of households actually protected, really. And a lot of people don't understand it. I think they don't understand. They think it's going to be too expensive. They don't necessarily understand how it works or why that's necessary.
Thank you. Did this result in, the staff that were involved, did it result in discussions around the water cooler?
Oh yes, we've had a few discussions about the water cooler, yes. Yeah, yes it did. I think the people who are involved are largely do have income protection insurance, but nonetheless, there were some interesting discussions.
I'm sure someone out and bought it straight afterwards. So a question from the audience here. Was there any difference between males and females as to their understanding of the need for cover?
Males are more likely to have income protection insurance than females. Who's most worried? Females. Okay, so when you talk about the incidents, when you talk to them about what could actually happen, the people who are most worried are females. Now, whether they're influencers, which they could be, and will therefore, if the male's the major earner in the household, will they influence the male to actually get income protection insurance? Or if they're the major earner, what will they do? They probably will go and get income protection insurance when they understand. So there are some differences.
Another question from the audience. You've researched who needs very well. What is the claims experience relative to their need for income protection?
Claims experience? Well, we know that the 1 in 8, I mean, I can only answer from the numbers we've got, but 1 in 8, when they had an event, actually had income protection insurance. If you're talking about, I'm not sure who asked that, but if you're talking about what was it like dealing with the insurer, we didn't really ask that question. The people who'd made comments, though, we asked them what actually happened when they had that event in the household. And I mean, people are saying there's a whole range of things from, well, we had insurance, it was really great, they paid out, it was great, lump sum, no problem, everything worked, to the other end of the spectrum, well, we lost the house. So there's a very wide range of experience. Some people who have insurance have found it reasonably good. They have no real problems. There's the odd one that mentions, we had a bit of an argument about whether or not we were really covered. But for most of them who said they were covered, there was no issue. It didn't appear to be an issue. Then the people who didn't cover, it was hard. They're basically saying it was really hard.
Thank you. Just one more. Was there any review of trauma cover and where families thought they didn't need income protection because they had trauma? Oh, sorry, was there any review of trauma cover?
We didn't ask that. We said to them that income protection insurance includes things like trauma cover or whatever, some of the other types of descriptions of it that are used in the industry, so that we were talking about it as a catch-all phrase. We're using that as a catch-all phrase, so there's no separation out.
And just one last question. What is the most important piece of information to get people to think about protecting themselves?
Understanding the incidents, we think. So they understand that in fact they're much more likely to be off work as a result of a serious illness than of a serious accident. People think in terms of serious accident, they don't necessarily think in terms of serious illness, and yet the incidence is twice. So they need to understand that, and they need to think about how long could they last for if in fact they were off work as a result of a serious illness.
Thank you. There's more questions coming in. For those aware of the need for income protection, what was the main reason they didn't take it out?
Did we ask that? We can only work on comments. It's often, I didn't think it was, there's two things that tend to pop up. I didn't think it was necessary or was expensive. We didn't delve into that into any great detail, but those are comments that actually arose.
And there are more questions coming in. Given the size of the post-65 cohort, why has the insurance sector failed to provide a policy that will provide $683 weekly cover for expenses for retirees? In a way, this is a question for the industry,
Yeah,
so I might just
answer that one.
I might move on to that one. And do the public think social benefits are high enough?
I can't, well, that's difficult as well because it's not really covered by this particular survey. I don't think I'll be able to answer that one either. Okay, not in respect of this particular survey.
And if you have any more questions, Grant will be available at morning tea, is that correct?
No, I have to be away, unfortunately.
So I'm sure.
But if there are, Tim, maybe we could arrange that we capture them and see what happens. Yeah?
Right. Oh, sorry, apparently there's another one I need to ask. Does the 75% benefit cause issues for households in the event of a claim?
The fact that it's 75% of income, I assume you mean.
Yes.
The people who had insurance didn't say that that was an issue. They didn't raise that as an issue. They were basically saying, yeah, it all worked, things were in place, we were okay, thank heavens, sigh, okay? So that didn't come up as a major issue.
Somebody just wants to check, the survey would categorise trauma and income as the same insurance. Is that what you said?
We said income protection insurance, which includes things like trauma cover and some of the other things that the industry commonly calls similar sort of thing.
Income protection, TPD, trauma, mortgage and credit that were related to illness.
All of those.
A generic category is trying to get as much of the categories as possible.
Because people have all sorts of, I think mine's called trauma cover, right? But there's other people who have mortgage protection insurance only, and some people have this, but it's all a form of income protection. Right? So we actually rolled that together. So we defined that at the start of the survey. This is what we're talking about, so that people could actually think about it. Because people will go out and they will look at different forms of this insurance. It won't all be the same. They'll look at what's suitable for their requirements at the time.
Great. Well, with that, I would like to welcome you to join me in thanking Grant for his presentation.
Thank you.
So that brings us to our next panel. Right, okay. So that brings us to our next panel, which is how a health crisis can become a financial crisis. Now, I've just been told right at this moment that one of our panelists, Louise Sanford from the Cancer Society, isn't going to be able to join us because she is nursing a sick aunt. Now, I do have some emails from Louise, so hopefully I can run through to a certain degree what she planned to cover. But in the meantime, I would like to invite up Don Scandrett from the Stroke Foundation and Terry Doran from the Heart Foundation. just a reminder while we're just getting ready, if you could text any questions to 021 902 850, and we will endeavour to get through all the questions that we can. So this session is how a health crisis can become a financial crisis. What are the realities of dealing with cancer, stroke or heart disease, and what is the financial toll for people with these serious illnesses and their families? Now, the members of our panel, they're very much involved at a grassroots level with the people that we're talking about, with real people out there who are suffering illnesses and finding that there is a huge gap. Now, I'm going to run through some questions with them and they will answer them. So we have Terry Doran from the Heart Foundation, whose role is nurse liaison, and as I said earlier, Terry has stepped in for one of her colleagues. And we've got Don Scandrett, who's Northern Regional Manager for the Stroke Foundation. So the first question goes to Don, and it's a devil's advocate question, and it's one that I believe, and I'm sure that a lot of you believe it as well, is that stroke is an old person's disease. And so, Don, surely it's an old person's disease and they're going to get NZ Super anyway, so why should they be concerned about stroke?
That's a real common myth, Diana, that a lot of people thinking, strokes only happen to people, older people, people over the age of 65. Strokes can happen to anyone. Typically in New Zealand there'll be about 40 kids under the age of 16 years that will have a stroke in any 1 year. So strokes can happen from babies up to, people over 100. We do get people over 100 have their first stroke. Typically in New Zealand, 25% of people that have a stroke are under the age of 65. But specifically in parts of Auckland, I'm talking about South Auckland, currently it's 40% are under the age of 65 that's having strokes, and that's been increasing by about 2 to 3% a year the last few years, which is quite scary. So I guess, you're looking at, Super's going to look after me. With the amount of people under the age of 65, we see more and more cases of, might be the sole income earner in the family, might have a stroke, and if they've got a number of dependents, that places huge pressures on that family. And we see it all the time, it's just soul destroying for that family because, trying to make ends meet, so that's really, really difficult.
Thank you. Will a stroke stop you working for the rest of your life? If I have a stroke this afternoon, is that the end of my career?
Well, it really depends on whereabouts in the brain the stroke has occurred, because there's different parts of your brain control different functions of your body. So again, it's really, really dependent. Like, there's the obvious signs that you can see from a stroke, which might be, difficulty with communication, or difficulty with, might be not be able to use a limb or an arm or a leg or something like that. But there's also stuff that you can't see. Quite a number of people have their eyesight affected. It might be their peripheral vision might be affected. There could be issues with their cognition. So you might look at someone and think that this person is absolutely knows what's going on when the fact is they find that really, really difficult. So that can be really challenging. There could be memory issues which on the face of it might be really hard to pick up. So that makes it really difficult. For example, if you're someone that's, say, a professional driver, it might be a truck driver, drive a bus, or be a pilot. Typically, if you have a stroke, there's absolutely a minimum of 3 years before you could even consider to go back and pick up that profession. So in a lot of cases, that's not going to be an option. So imagine if you're, for example, a truck driver in your 50s, you have a stroke, you've driven a truck all your life. So essentially that's the end of your career. So at that stage it gets really difficult. Just use another example for someone that's, talking is very much part of what they do. For example, if you're a salesperson, if you're a public speaker or even a politician, just imagine if suddenly you lose the ability to speak, how that's going to affect you. And that's the sort of thing that we see on a regular basis, and people are dealing with that on a regular basis as well.
Thank you. You mentioned that there's people who think I've paid taxes all my life and I'll be looked after, and I'm sure that everybody in the audience has heard that. They've paid taxes, they're going to be looked after by the government. This doesn't always happen, and do you see examples of financial stress and financial hardship as a result of stroke?
Yeah, well, I talked about, you know, the families where they had the sole income earner has had a stroke, and you know, the burden that places on that family unit. So that's a very real one that we see on a frequent basis. We also, another example of financial hardship, just an example that I've seen recently, it was a woman that was in her 40s. She was self-employed. She had a stroke, and as a result of that, she decided that she owned her own home. She decided that she would not be able to keep up with the mortgage payments, so she was forced to, she decided, made the decision to sell her home, and that way she's sort of gone back from, you know, saved up for years to the extent that she had invested in the home, whereas now her income had dropped, so she's reliant on a benefit. So that person's really, really struggling now, and she's finding it really difficult.
Yeah. And do you have any more examples that you could tell us of people who've sort of experienced stroke and the effect it's had on their day-to-day income?
You get examples, and I guess again the example I was using was the people that are relying on communication is a difficult one. I've seen a couple of people that we've been involved with just in the last few months, again where they've been, and this is probably using the analogy with the people here, they'd been a salesperson selling insurance actually, and so that person, that meant, you know, they no longer had that ability to provide that income. They even got to the stage where they had to have other people come in and provide support for them. So again, that's providing sort of increased, you know, difficulty for that person and for that family. It's really difficult.
Yeah, thank you. I think that probably people don't realise how difficult it's going to be until it actually hits them, or it hits somebody that they know, and then they become aware of it, which I think relates back to some of the research that showed that when people have experience of an incident, they do actually understand that they need this cover, and they may not understand before then. So now I've got some questions for Terry. Okay, so now I know I've fallen into this when I was younger, perhaps not now, but we all feel 100 foot tall and bulletproof. You know, we do. You know, a 25-year-old. I'm sure if there's any 25-year-olds in this audience, they probably feel 100 foot tall and bulletproof. But as your life goes on a little bit further, you suddenly start to feel more vulnerable, and then certainly at my age, which I won't say what that is exactly, but it's getting on, and there's people around me, left, right and centre, getting cancer, having all sorts of illnesses, and it's suddenly all hitting me in the face. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to heart disease, we assume it's disease again of older people, and mainly older males. Does it happen to working people as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. We do associate heart attacks with, you know, increasing age in the older people, but we know from recent statistics from the Ministry of Health that 40% of people that are discharged from hospital post-heart attack are aged between 25 and 65. So, you know, the statistics speak for themselves. Of that group, nearly 80% of them are in the 50 to 65 age group. If we had to add those between 65 and 75, of which many are still working in that age group, then 62% of people discharged from hospital, you know, are under 75 years of age, a high number of the working population. We do know that 9 people are admitted to hospital each day in New Zealand with heart attack or angina. So it does affect, you know, younger age groups than we believe.
Yes, and have you seen them in your practice? Younger people who've had heart attacks, and it must have been a surprise to them.
Yeah, and you know, it's you see it all the time where they don't see the signs, they don't actually feel anything, and all of a sudden their life's turned around and upside down because they've had, you know, a heart event. I was out last week visiting some medical professionals in the Gisborne area, and yeah, quite a few stories of, you know, people in their 40s who had just had a heart event. So yeah, it's a reality.
And they're shocked, I presume.
Yeah, and the families, it's the whole ripple effect, you know, and a lot of these are the main breadwinners for the families also. So it's a huge effect for people who, in the working population and for families out there. It's a reality.
And as you say, age 40, you've still got 25 or even 35 years of work ahead of you.
Yeah,
so
you're working until you're in your 70s, so yeah, it's huge.
I understand that you hear from a lot of people who don't expect them to happen to them. and there might be a need to save, to cover time off work. Do you think there's more of a need for people to save?
Yeah, I mean, the Heart Foundation has a health inquiry line, and we get all sorts of calls from people just wanting to know about heart health, general questions, ranging from just cholesterol, what's normal cholesterol levels, through to, you know, concerns about heart disease. And more of the queries are coming through about financial questions. A lot of them, again, is related to the driving. Driving's a big issue if you've had a heart event. One of the most recent ones we had was from a very distraught young girl who called up because her father had been discharged. He'd had a heart attack and had open heart surgery afterwards. Now, the concern was that he was quite a high earner prior to his event, so financially they were stable. However, he needed more time off than the sickness entitlement allowed him to. So when he inquired about benefits or help from the government, he learned that he's not entitled to any. They didn't have any savings. So she had phoned up distraught because he was now in a position where he was saying, I have to go back to work, because he had bills to pay, mortgage to pay, lifestyle costs. And she was distraught at the thought that her father was having to go back to work when he wasn't ready. He wasn't well enough to be back working. And these are real concerns for people and patients and families.
It often amazes me how often there are people earning maybe 100,000 or more who have no savings and who spend all their money.
Yeah.
They go through the spending creep. As their income goes up, they spend more and more. And quite often, actually, they're not just spending to the total of their income, they're spending to the total of their credit.
Yeah.
And these people simply have zero saving. I mean, to me, it's totally foreign, and I'm sure to some of you in the audience it is, but it's the reality of New Zealand.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that you see, like this man, for example, who had earned a good income but hadn't saved. And I can see people nodding in the audience. When working people are diagnosed with heart disease, can they continue working in their existing job? This interested me as a question because you assume that heart disease, that's it, but some people won't get treatment immediately and some people will be able to go back and some won't, I presume.
Yeah.
So what do you see on the ground?
I mean, every case is different. It's all about the individual's sort of treatment and recovery. Also depends on what type of event that they've had and how much of the heart muscle's been damaged, whether their employment involves, you know, heavy manual jobs or whether it's a sedentary job. So, I mean, some people can be back, depending on the event and the treatment they've had afterwards. Obviously, if they have, you know, a procedure for a stent to open up the artery, or if they have open heart surgery, or if they're managed medically, that all impacts in how quickly they can return to work, or if they can return to the same job. Some people can be back to work, you know, within a week. You'd think rare after a heart attack, but some people can be off for several months. It also depends on, you know, a lot of people who have had a heart attack can also have coexisting medical conditions. So really, it varies quite dramatically depending on the individual, the event and the treatment, and of course the type of job. And again, one of the heaviest jobs affected is driving.
Yes.
Because they have to be, you know, the New Zealand Transport Agency, it's a minimum of 4 weeks before you can apply after heart surgery. But the reality is that many people have to apply and get signed off by the specialist. That can see them waiting, you know, for a few months, depending on their priority and where they are in the system. And that again can cause a lot of stress and anxiety to individuals in terms of income and loss of.
And anxiety is probably the last thing they need when they've just had a heart attack.
Exactly. And that's the other thing also, that, you know, with the pre-existing conditions, depression is something that's, you know, related to events like heart attack.
So it's a cause of or a result of, or both?
Well, yeah, with any long-term condition or any sort of life-changing event like that, it can predispose to depression.
It's something you probably don't think about when you're thinking about heart attacks and
it's
heart conditions, about the other related things that you may suffer.
Yeah.
Okay, so both of you have talked a lot about driving. It was interesting talking to both the Heart Foundation and the Stroke Foundation, because both of them kept talking about, the people I was talking there kept talking about drivers and the fact that drivers can be affected. And I remember an airline pilot friend of mine who once described himself as a bus driver, and it's quite true because they are driving a bus that's just in the air. And you don't think about how long they might be off work for, and the fact that they have to wait possibly months for surgery if it's not acute. They have to wait months for surgery, and then months after that before they can go back to work. And by then, most of them will be in the 50% that can only last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, so the okay, so you've covered that. Sorry. Okay, so if you can just talk a bit more about the waiting lists, because I have these images, and this was my uncle in the 80s who was on holiday in Australia, and he fell down with a heart attack, and he had instant open heart surgery, and then it was all dealt with instantly. But I understand that waiting lists do play a big part for people with heart conditions, and if you could just go through and explain the waiting lists a bit more would be good.
Yeah, again, depending, as you said, the level of severity and disease and how that person is seen as a priority. So there can be delays up to several weeks for some people, and in the meantime they're suffering the other effects of this. They could be suffering from exertional angina, where they're getting chest pain. They could be having shortness of breath that can prevent them from working while they're waiting on the waiting list for the treatment or the surgery that they need. And for others it's the mental battle that they have during that wait. They can be too scared to return to work because they're having these symptoms. They don't know what's ahead of them. They don't know what they can do and can't do. So there's that limbo periods, and that can require a lot of support from mental health interventions as well. So yeah, there can be anything between 6 weeks to 3 months recovery time afterwards, plus the wait beforehand. So. Yeah, and it depends, I suppose, on where you are in New Zealand as well. And
I'm not going to ask you a question about this, but one group that you mentioned was the 65 to 75-year-olds who are still working, and there's a large number of those in our society who can't live on national super alone. But obviously they won't be eligible, most of them, for income protection, and they will simply have to go on to New Zealand Super. So there's actually quite a big group there which will struggle, and it's a group in society that I find that worries me, that people have to work that late, that long in life, and the fact that they are financially vulnerable if they have to stop working. Now, as you know, I only heard just as they came to sit down that Louise wasn't coming, and sadly I have actually some answers from her on my phone, which I'd have you sitting here for hours while I found them. But I do have a few notes from her. Just from our conversations, which I'll read through, but unfortunately they're more bullet points that she was going to talk about. So whether they make 100% sense, I'm not sure, but I will endeavour to do my best, and then we'll move on to questions. I do know that one thing that concerned Louise, and we had conversations about this, was that she has a big concern that the income protection insurance, that the stand-down period's too long. But I think that, like much of the public, she doesn't understand that you pay for that stand-down period. So if you want a shorter stand-down period, you pay a higher premium. And if you want a longer stand-down period, you get a smaller premium. And I think that is something that we perhaps need to educate the public more about, that if they need a 3-week stand-down period or 4-week stand-down period, they do need to pay for it. And that does come at a cost, unfortunately, which a lot of people cannot afford. So, please, I apologise if I'm reading from this. The thing is that one of the things that Louise said to me was that there's an irony that at the very time when people need more money, they suddenly lose their income. So they're diagnosed with cancer, and it's probably the same for the heart condition or for stroke, and they need money to get to appointments, and they need money sometimes to pay for treatments that aren't covered by Pharmac, and they need money for all sorts of things, and they quite often, just at that point where they're just living within their income, they suddenly find their expenses get greater, and yet they have no income coming in. And it's something that the public perhaps don't think about, and that we, those of us who educate the public in different ways, need to get through to them, although it's actually very difficult to get any concept to do with insurance through to the public, as I'm sure a few of you know. And she gave the example of sometimes they'll need to eat very specific foods, or they may want to suddenly improve their diet. If you've been diagnosed with cancer and your diet's McDonald's and KFC, you might actually want to learn more about nutrition and eat better, and this will generally cost you more money. And that the often anti-nausea prescription she was talking about that cost you quite a lot of money, and that you may just need to catch a taxi to treatment, or you may in fact need to move. If you're living in Matamata, you have to come up to Auckland for treatment. And there are some costs that are covered by the health department, which Louise was going to talk about, but they're not all costs, and they're not all covered. So if you live in Matamata and you're struggling on your income as it is at the moment, and you have to go to either Hamilton or Auckland, it's going to cost you additional money. And you may actually need to pay for childcare, and that's something I think with life insurance and income protection that people don't think about, that suddenly somebody's going to have to look after those children. You may be a single parent, or you may be that your partner is having to go out to work to cover your income, and those children need looking after while you come up to Auckland or Hamilton, or if you're in the South Island, to Christchurch for your treatment. And she says that a lot of people feel psychologically a burden, that they're putting a burden on their loved ones when cancer happens, and that the income protection insurance, or actually having that income protection coming in, would help them enormously. But as we know, very few people have that income protection insurance. And she says that if a patient's caught up worrying about how they're going to cover all these costs, it actually doesn't help their treatment and their recovery, which I'm sure is the same for both stroke and heart disease and many other illnesses. Okay. And she's saying, as we probably know, that a lot of people, even if they have to work, they're probably going to work part-time. They're not going to be able to carry on with their full-time jobs. And that she said that they have come across cases where some people choose not to have treatment. They're diagnosed with cancer and they choose not to have treatment because of what it's going to cost them. And having to go through that as an individual, that would be horrifying to think that I have cancer, I am going to choose not to be treated because I can't afford it. And yet that is happening in our society. So that was Louisa's comments. And I'm sorry that she's not here to actually read them out herself. And I have some questions. So this is one for Don. What's the average age of a stroke, and is this trend line getting younger or older?
The average age that we're sort of seeing in the northern region, so that's the Auckland and Northland area, would be in the vicinity of about 69, 70. What we're seeing, there's a study that's been done in the Auckland area for the last 40 years. Every 10 years that they'll do a study and they'll look at everyone that's had a stroke in that year and what's happened with that. So what we're seeing is there's been an overall decline in the rate of stroke, with the exception of the Maori and Pacific Island populations haven't declined quite at the same rate. But what we've also seen is more and more younger people are having stroke than what we've seen before. So there's been huge medical advances. We're seeing less and less, and a lot less people are dying of stroke now than what they used to. But the other side of that, we're seeing some people that are severely disabled. Certainly my team in the northern region are dealing with some cases that are some pretty dire circumstances that people have gone through, and in most cases those are younger people as well.
And males or females?
Well, it's actually, as far as deaths, is about 60% of women die of stroke. I actually thought strokes tended to be more male-dominated, but 60% of women die of stroke. So, when we look at stroke survivors, pretty evenly balanced between men and women.
So 60% of women who had a stroke die from it? Or did I misread that?
60% of deaths.
Of deaths?
Of stroke deaths occur in women, yeah.
Oh, women, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And just a question from me, why is it getting younger? Why is the demographic getting younger for strokes?
Part of it, certainly what we're seeing is I guess, there's been a real trend, I guess the last 10 years, you're looking at sort of everyone's sort of going for the trends to go for low fat. So you go for low fat foods, so you take out, you know, you take the fat out and it affects the taste. So what do? You pile in sugar, you pile in salt, and they pose and, you know, bring in all sorts of other health conditions as well. So, for example, salt is really, if you want to really increase your blood pressure, have lots and lots of salt. And so it's things like that. We're seeing more and more people with high blood pressure. We're getting, you know, high cholesterol. That's another risk factor. So it's things like that. And it's probably linked in with diet, a lack of physical activity, things like that. Very much the same things that affect heart disease as well.
Yes, yes, it definitely sounds like that. I'm sure that the younger generation as well is eating a lot more processed foods, and we've had various discussions over dinner recently because I accidentally bought low-fat mayonnaise, and we've been reading the back of the packet of all the things in it and the sugars and all sorts of things in this low-fat mayonnaise, but I'm too much of a tightwad to throw it out and go and buy another one. Oh, hang on, this phone keeps going to sleep on me. Sorry, it's not my phone. Does risk of heart attack peak nationally in the 45 to 55 age group, do you know, Terry?
How do you mean, does it peak?
Does risk of heart attack peak? So is that, what is the highest risk age for? When does it peak? Do you have any idea?
When does it peak? Well, I know, like, from the figures we're seeing more in the sort of 50 to 65 age group, but we, in terms of peaking, I don't know what it's a...
No, that's fine. Does it have any more questions? Okay. Look, you were talking about heart attacks that were managed medically. What do you mean by that exactly? That,
well, if I'm talking about the difference between a heart attack being managed by, you know, a procedure, like a open heart surgery or stent or procedure, to be, you know, managed by drugs, medication, and other interventions.
And so am I more likely to get back to work if I have medical management or if I have a procedure, or are they not related? Well,
obviously if you have a procedure, like open heart surgery, then your time off work can be a lot more than if you hadn't, because obviously, you know, if you've had open heart surgery, it can take, you know, up to 3 months for, you know, the sternum, the breast bone here to heal, and if you're in a manual lifting job, things like that should be avoided. Sure. But, you know, it depends on the individual and their own recovery times as well.
Yeah.
It's very...
have you seen cases where people can't get back to work at all?
Yeah, I think, you know, you do see cases where people, you know, never return to work, and again, it just depends on what job that they carried out beforehand. You know, a lot of people don't have a plan B in some jobs, especially a lot of the sort of manual types of work. I mean, you would hope that most people can get back to some sort of work. Very rarely have I seen nobody that's returned to nothing. And again, it depends on their age and stage of life and other factors. Yes. But it varies, it can vary, you know, dramatically from individual to individual.
Sure, okay. So this is from a member of the audience. In my experience, those that suffer serious illness can be advocates for getting insurances. Have either of the organisations ever partnered with insurance professionals and these advocates?
Certainly in the past, the Stroke Foundation has partnered with different organisations where they've used case studies or people that have been affected as a means to, you know, promote that. Currently we don't. We're in the market for something like that. So if anyone wants to come and talk to me afterwards.
I think you've got all of our leading insurers in here, so hopefully, hopefully there'll be a partnership brokered at the break. And our next question from the audience. This is an interesting one, and I'm sure it's actually very important. How much does certainty of income help in the recovery of those hit by stroke or heart? And I can imagine myself being very stressed after one of those events, and I've got a stressful job, so actually having that income protection coming in would allow me to relax.
I mean, certainly yeah, it goes without saying that it's, you know, it's another factor that can, you know, delay people in the healing process if they're stressed or worried or anxious about money. So I would imagine that it is a big factor. Again, going back to people who are returning to work too soon after a heart attack because they don't have any other source of income can be a huge concern in their health and their recovery, and also the risk of, you know, further events, because we do know that people who have heart attacks, you know, are at high risk of having another event. So, you know, it's another factor.
Oh, absolutely, and it's certainly the same for us. I actually heard of an example recently where a guy, he'd only commenced new employment, he'd been in the role a matter of weeks, and he had a mild stroke, which he masked from his workmates and colleagues, because he was worried that, you know, he hadn't been employed long enough, so he wasn't qualified, you know, wasn't going to get any sick leave or anything like that. And he ended up having quite a large stroke about 3 weeks after that, you know, and it might have been, his secondary stroke might have been preventable if he'd, you know, done something initially, so it gets very difficult. So it's, you know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce that risk of anxiety, and certainly if you're worrying about, you know, how are you going to feed your family, how are you going to keep your family together, how the mortgage is going to be paid, that's really going to affect your ability to recover. What you see in a lot of people that have been affected by stroke and brain injury, as a way that the brain recovers, you get fatigue is such a big issue. So we'll go and do a day's work and we'll feel tired, but it's nothing like the fatigue you feel when you've had a brain injury. And that's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration, that fatigue and the ability to think clearly about what's, you know, what you're doing and how you're going to recover and things like that.
Are you able to give us just a guesstimate, and we won't quote you on it, but a guesstimate of what percentage of people who've had, who that you deal with, who've gone back to work too soon?
I would have no idea for that, Diane.
No. Do you have any other examples? You had the example of the man who went back, didn't tell his workmates.
Yep.
Do you have other examples of where they've gone back to work too soon?
Yeah, we had one example. It was quite an unusual one, I thought. I had a ring from an employer. They were worried about, they had a greenhouse. So they had an employee that had a stroke, and this woman had decided that she wanted to come back to work. And her role, she wasn't driving or anything like that, but the employer was quite concerned about this woman's ability to function in I guess, the greenhouse environment where there was forklifts moving around and tractors and things like that. And then that afternoon I actually had a phone call from the union that was looking, or this lady belonged to, and he was, this union person was absolutely concerned about this person's welfare as well. So you got both the employer and the union, both had the exact same concerns, which I thought was quite unusual. As it was, it turned out that it wasn't possible for this woman to continue in that employment. It was just the risk of someone running over her was just too great. She just couldn't manage that risk at that time, and she ended up leaving that job.
I think we often don't think of those details of just really how it affects people on the ground, and this is why it's very interesting to hear these stories. Now, another question from the floor. In your experience when talking to patients, how is the need for medical insurance viewed? And I presume by whoever asked this question, you mean just standard health insurance, not income protection. Is that correct? Someone out there asked it, but anyway. So in your experience when talking to patients, how is the need for medical insurance as opposed to income protection viewed?
I don't, in my role, I haven't come across specific examples where there has been that expressed to me, so I can't answer that one.
No. Okay, Terry?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, from a health professional's point of view, you know, you're more likely to get involved in discussing with patients about medical insurance. It's one of the things that, you know, you would ask them if they come for a consultation and they need referral, but income protection, not so much.
I think that the public simply doesn't know the difference often between medical insurance, or they may know of medical insurance but never heard of any type of income protection insurance. And they often think it's important to have medical insurance, but they don't think about the other insurances. And I know myself, if I have to have a hip replacement tomorrow, which is unlikely, that I can go out and pay for it from savings. And so most of those medical insurance things, although you may have a $100,000 bill on cancer, breast cancer or something like that, but those things that you can, a lot of people can pay out of savings, but they can't necessarily cover a year or two's income out of savings, and yet there seems to be a lower understanding of income protection insurance compared to something that just pays your medical bills.
Exactly, and I think as well, you know, if you're seeing patients within secondary or tertiary care, you know, it's a lot of time post-event or post-diagnosis.
I think on that note, unless there's any more questions coming in, we will break early. Oh, you will just double check. So just double check there's no more questions, and if not, we'll break for morning tea a little bit early and give you time to speak to the previous speakers or to anybody from the FSC. No? So just, if you just join me in thanking Don and Terry. And if you could all be back seated by 11 o'clock, that would be great. Thank you. Rukinga Haupapa and the two of them who you saw on the video earlier, both who have had income protection insurance. They've been two amongst the minority of New Zealanders that have it, and they've both benefited from it. So I have a number of questions. Obviously you saw their videos, and you'll be able to see them online later, and there are longer videos that you can see as well. But my first question is going to go to Rukingi, and Rukingi took out insurance with Asteron. I understand it was sold to him rather than him necessarily thinking, I need some income protection insurance, but he's somebody that really benefited from it. And so it was around about sometime between 2000 and 2002 when he took out his policy. Probably, like most of us, felt 10 foot tall and bulletproof. But I'd just like to ask Rukingi, why did you take the income protection insurance out with Asteron?
Well, my wife and I, we've got 4 daughters. And of course, you know, me being the dad, I was forever running around after my grandsons and granddaughters. And then we decided you guys need to have your own house instead of renting a house. Can you guys save money here, you know, to get you a house and so on? No, okay, all right. So my wife and I, we decided to mortgage our house. So for 2 of the daughters, that's what we did. I didn't realise because all the mortgages and everything were then piled on top of me. And it wasn't until I saw the presentation this morning and I was thinking, I'm pretty sure it must have been my blooming insurance broker who told me I probably needed to have income insurance. So when you asked me a few days ago, I thought that I was the clever person that thought I needed it. But this morning I would think that it must have been the broker, because we ended up with all the mortgage on top of us, my wife and I.
I'm sure you were very clever to take the broker's advice, and because I'm sure there's a lot of brokers who give advice and then the clients simply don't take the insurances. So to actually taken it and to benefit from it. Now, this experience of having a stroke has led you into doing research into the field of stroke, and particularly with Māori and with whānau in your area in the Bay of Plenty. Can you please just tell us a bit more about your research with stroke victims and amongst your whānau and in your region, please?
As Dawn said, stroke, just like all the illnesses, I was bulletproof and invincible, you know, once upon a time. Not anymore. And I decided that I needed to learn more about these illnesses. And with stroke, we thought that I was the only unlucky in the whole world to catch this thing, stroke, which none of our family knew anything about it. Then when we had a quick look around the house that we lived in, suddenly we were surrounded by families all around us that had been quietly hiding for generations. And so therefore we started a stroke group, and once everybody realised that I hadn't died, because I disappeared from the planet, so they all thought I just died. But when I started turning up, you know, people that you relate to, they all, oh yeah, we've got an auntie, we've got a cousin, we've got a nephew. And so where I live, it's only one little part around Rotorua, and then very quickly we started rotating around Lake Rotorua, and all the other families started hosting it. As I started to see all of that, then I really started to worry, and when I heard some of the data that was just touched on, and I thought, wow, I knew nothing about stroke. Now I'm starting to get really worried about it, and which eventually led to me doing the Masters, which was not easy. Oh, well, the Bachelor wasn't easy either. Come to think about it, yeah, a couple of years, or 18 months after I had the stroke, I was a teacher for a long time, and my daughter said to me, well, Dad, well, what are you going to do? You know, yes, you've got income insurance and da-da-da-da, but what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. Well, what did I used to do? And it was education. So I said, okay, well, education, okay. So I went to one university. Then a daughter tells me that I didn't like that particular university because I'd lost my memory. So then I suddenly started to learn a whole lot of things about not just learning, but specific learning. Which eventually led to the Masters, so that I wasn't just learning anything. I wanted to learn about this illness, and in this case, just in the area where I live. So our tribe is from just east of Tauranga down to Lake Taupo, and so that's the families that were involved. So that was with the Masters, and now I've just started into doctorate. So I graduated at the beginning of this year. We had the graduation, of course my mum and dad were there, and yeah, I'm quite lucky that my mum and dad are alive, and of course everybody was celebrating, but I said to Mum, I'm carrying on, I'm going to do this blimmin' doctorate thing, and she goes, why? And I said, because.
And
Well, I think a lot of what I'm hearing this morning, you know why? Because my family is saying, well, why are you coming to this thing up in Auckland? And I said, well, I think once I started hearing stories from these families, I started to separate into physical needs, learning needs, and spiritual needs. And I thought, well, the income insurance for me, because I had it, but I met a lot of other families who did it. I've seen exactly the difference, night and day difference.
And I understand there were 2 out of 9 of the families that you studied that had income protection insurance, and the
Yep.
others didn't.
Yep.
Yep. Now I'll address a question to Lisa. Now Lisa, you've used your income protection insurance more than once.
Yes.
You've had periods more than once, and in each instance you had a 3-month stand-down period, and before the insurance payments kicked in. And you talked about living off savings and the largesse of family when we were speaking last week. With your time over again, would you pay more to get a shorter stand-down period?
I suspect not. I think the thing always to weigh up about income insurance, as with all insurances, which of course you don't need till you need them, is that it's very, it's quite a big chunk of your income. And I haven't done the figures, so I can't say for sure whether I would be prepared to pay the extra. But I think what it has made me think about is perhaps doing some better savings and some better planning so that I have that 3-month buffer. And I suppose it's like normal insurance as well. If you always have to pay a premium, or you have a percentage that you don't get, so you kind of allow for that whenever you make an insurance claim, or when you plan for your insurance. So 3 months is pretty reasonable. I know you can pay a bit more and have a lesser stand down.
It's a shame that our speaker from the Cancer Society didn't hear that, because she had concerns about those stand-down periods. How much did it cost you each month? Do you remember?
About $450, I think. So that was based on an earlier salary. And just to what we were saying before, is that I also did not choose to have my own income insurance. I set up a small business, and my office manager was my sister. So she insisted we get everything done properly, and so we had both my business partner and myself ended up with income insurance, which I tell you I would never have had. But just because I know I wouldn't have got around to thinking about it probably. I would have thought that ACC would have covered anything that happened to me, or that, like you, I was invulnerable and wouldn't have been an issue. But fortunately, my sister had a wiser head, and I just didn't ever drop the income insurance. And it was some years later, of course, that I actually needed it.
And I'm sure you were very grateful for it.
Very grateful to my sister.
Yeah. Rukingi, you said that it would be kapai if the industry could forge more links with iwi, and so that more of your people could have income protection cover. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
In the Masters research, I actually interviewed them whether they actually had income insurance or not. And the doctorate research is going to be doing the same. So what little I can remember about income insurance is pretty that much. So I think today is a big one for me. Just seeing the background that's on one of those sheets of paper. If families just knew the difference between income coming into the house versus that income not coming into the house. The reality for us is that we can become part of the, because we've been through it. That's the thing too, is we've met so many of these families. So I think it makes it easier for us to talk with families. I'm focusing on ones who have suffered the illness, but I'm going to meet a lot of people like the movers and shakers within their own iwi. And so for me, knowing just a little bit of information we've had this morning, for me, it's just opened up the eyes. And we have a lot of people that, like my 4 daughters, are all professionals, and I was talking with one daughter that I was with this morning, and I said, have you got income insurance? She goes, no. I said, why not? And but I didn't have enough information myself. So when I get back, I'll be giving one of those simple sheets that you've given. You can't avoid it. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah, I'm sure at lunchtime there'll be many people here from the industry who you could meet and talk to. So, so Lisa, in all the years you were paying your insurance, were you tempted to stop paying? $400 a month, it's, you know, it seems at the time like it's dead money.
Well, it does, and yes, I'm sure I did at times, and it just kept on chugging on with it. I suppose because I had a little tweak with it, I had a, not cancer, but I had a small issue with my eye, which I didn't manage very well, and so I ended up probably not maximising the use of income insurance, but what I did do, it made me think about it, so I had a period of not being able to work, and although I think I only ended up with perhaps a couple of months of insurance covering bills, it was enough to make me realise that it would be quite useful if something worse happened, and then it did. So perhaps it was a good lesson. Didn't seem so at the time, but...
And you've become a bit of an advocate for income protection insurance with those around you, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, I don't mean it was a lifesaver at all, but it was certainly a lifestyle saver for me. You know, and it did mean I could pay bills and pay my mortgage, and I suppose there are people, I mean, there's always that balance, isn't there? There are people who have large savings, and their argument's always if you put that amount of money into a pot somewhere and don't touch it, and then you draw on that when you need to. So A, you have to be able to save that amount of money, not spend it, which wouldn't work for me. And B, I think those costs add up much more than you think. So it's certainly worked out, not, you know, my back of the envelope calculations I've done, it's certainly been hugely beneficial for me. And yes, absolutely, I advocate it and say, people think about it perhaps if you have your own business, but of course it's just as important if you don't have your own business, if you're just a, you know, a regular wage or salary earner.
We all have to pay our mortgages whether we have a business or not.
Sadly, yes.
Rukingi, a question from the audience. Can you tell us more about how you and your whānau dealt with memory loss related to your stroke?
One daughter and her family moved into our house, and it's only a little 2-bedroom house. So I get a couple and their 2 children in with us, and very quickly I learned how to fight for a remote so I didn't have to watch children's programs all day. So I think the neat thing from, and meeting a lot of these other families, a lot of the strategies that they shared, some of them are quite simple. Depending on the cultures that we are in. So when something hits bad in our family, everybody swoop in and somebody will find a way to help. It doesn't pay the bills, but it relieves some of the other pressures. So I think for me, learning that was one of the huge things that I learnt within 2 years. Yeah.
Yes. And look, I believe that you're going to do more study about income protection insurance and the iwi. What are your future goals there?
I'll be interested to see what your website is, because just talking with my daughter last night and my wife this morning, yes, I think for me, I've got to start with my own family, and we go from there.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to go out and broadcast to the world. Sure. I think we need to prove in our own family. So the neat thing for me is I'm an example of what you do get when you do have income insurance. Yes. So I'm the classic example. And so I think in the world I live in too, the more grey your hair gets, the more likely people start listening to you. True, simply because you seem to have been around a little bit longer, so maybe you've experienced things a little bit more. And in this case, that's one thing that I have, yes, which most of our family don't.
One last question from the floor. Both of you, can you explain any increased costs you had as a result of living with the illness, and how long those costs, the duration of those costs was?
Not for me. I'm well insured, and I've got very comprehensive health insurance as well. So from a health perspective, no extra costs. But I think just looking at what you were saying as well, it's maybe it's a New Zealand thing, maybe it's just what people do when you're in time of trouble. So the support comes. People gather around, and we know that, and that's, I'm sure everyone who's been through any major health issue knows what happens. Your friends come around, family come around, you know, you find you've got people popping out of the woodwork who perhaps you wouldn't have thought of, and people are fabulous, but of course that doesn't pay the bills. And that's the thing that just is so important. And for myself, I don't have a partner, so the money I make is the money I pay out, and the money that comes in goes out. So there's no buffer to say, well, somebody else can perhaps pick up the slack for a bit, because that's something you can't ask of people. People can provide all the meals, they can provide the comfort, the shoulder to scream and yell on, and all those sorts of things. But that monetary thing is so crucial, and we sort of forget that because we talk about sickness a lot, and we talk about how wonderful people are and how you need support. But of course, it's the harsh realities of life is that if you don't have some income coming in, you can't pay the bills that need to go out. And that's sort of my really big learning, is that it sits alongside the stuff we get from our communities. So it's not an either or, it's just, to me, it was a really, really important part of my getting well, because it was a stress that was taken away. So I suppose that's my flag I go out with. Say absolutely, and because people say, oh, but my family are fabulous, or my community's been fabulous, and they absolutely are, as you know what it's like, but it's when it comes to cold hard cash, that's what the reality of income insurance is, and that's why it's just imperative, I say.
Thank you. And just last, Ruki, quickly, were there any additional costs for you as a result of your illness?
Not financial, but of course my wife she took the buffer for everything. So I think the income insurance took a lot of the pressure off her, but of course it was all the other needs that I needed as well as my wife. So yeah, I think we're 10 years later. 10 years ago I had the stroke, and 10 years now I almost know what happened. So I think whether you can understand what you're being told to immediately when you have these illnesses, well, it didn't work for me. But in terms of income insurance, yes, huge benefit. But it took the pressure off my wife.
Well, thank you both of you, and please join me in thanking them.
Thank you.
So that brings us to our next panel, and it's answering the big question, what can be done to bridge the gap? And we've become very aware of the gap this morning. And so I'd like to welcome up Linda Smarden, Linda Watling, Naomi Valentine and Penny Burgess. First of all, I'd like to thank Partners Life for sponsoring this session, so thank you, Naomi, and your colleagues who are out there. So I'll just introduce, on my right is Penny Burgess, who is Regional Manager for ANZ, and then there is Naomi Valentine, as we will all know, who's the Chief Executive of Partners Life. Linda Watling, in the green, who is Technical Claims Manager for ACC, and then Linda Smarden, Regional Director, Auckland, for the MSD. So my first questions are going to go to Linda Smarden, but I'm just going to give Linda the buttons so that she can run through her presentation. So Linda just has one slide so that she has some information up there that you can understand what she's talking about. So Linda, first of all, many of the audience will have no idea what they might receive through work and income, and I know that I have no idea, and we talked about that in the break, that I have no idea what I would be entitled to, and probably like many people in that research, I'd be entitled to very little, or believe I would. And so they have no idea if they're temporarily or permanently disabled by illness, what they might get and what extras they might get. Can you give some examples, please?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, look, there is financial assistance available to people when they've lost their main income, and that can include when people have suffered a health condition, an injury or disability. The way that financial assistance is assessed is based on the composition of the family. and I'll explain how that kind of works as I work through some examples, because we thought the easiest way perhaps to demonstrate for you was to show you some scenarios, because income support is made up of several different components, and it is an income tested assistance. So the first example we thought we would use was a couple with 2 children. So firstly, we would assess people for a main benefit. If it's somebody who's recently had a health condition, that would likely be a job seeker benefit. For that sort of family dynamic, a couple with 2 children, the maximum amount per week, if there is no other income, is $350.20 net. If we're talking about a couple here, so if one partner is still able to work and is in employment, if they have an income of over $30,212, there'd be no entitlement to that main benefit. If they have income over that limit, there may be eligibility for supplementary assistance, and I'll talk a little bit about that next. So the benefit has the main benefit, but there is also supplementary assistance that we can consider. Accommodation supplement is the example that I'm going to talk to next, based on a mortgage of $550 a week. So accommodation supplement is a weekly payment, and it helps people with either rent, board, or the cost of owning a home. So like I say, the example we're using here is a mortgage of $550 a week. It's not quite that straightforward. There are 4 different levels of rate that are payable depending on the area in which people live. So we're going to use an example based on Central and North Auckland, which is $225 a week non-taxable allowance. This type of assistance can be paid to people who aren't on a main benefit. So if people have income, we can assess what they might be eligible for. They may be able to get some accommodation assistance from us. The third part of the payment is the family tax credit. So Work and Income pays this assistance to people who are on a main benefit on behalf of Inland Revenue. For a family with 2 children, and those rates are based on the ages of children. So we've got 1 child under 15, 1 under 12. That would be $157 a week. The cut-out point for that is $74,000. But we will pay it for people who are in receipt of benefit. People can elect to still receive it through Inland Revenue if they choose, but we will normally include it with the benefit payment. So that is a total of $732.20 a week. There may be other extra help that we can consider, case by case. Disability allowance, which is an allowance that helps with regular ongoing costs that people might have related to a disability or a medical condition. That's based on actual expenses that people incur, and it's up to a maximum of $61.69 a week. That is something that we can also assess for people who are not in receipt of a main benefit. So that's example 1. And the second example that we thought might be useful for you was that of a sole parent with 1 child and unable to work. So the sole parent maximum rate per week, $300.98. The accommodation supplement example we used was on a rental of $450 a week. And again, we used that Auckland Central Area 1 example, which would be $160 a week. And the family tax credit payment of $92 a week. So again, a total of $552.98 for a sole parent with 1 child. The disability allowance could also be considered. That's available right across the spectrum.
Thank you. Now, the next question, I've written an article about this and it's gone in one ear and out the other, so hopefully you can help remind me and the audience. How does having income protection insurance affect your benefits?
Okay, so if people have income protection insurance, there will be an impact on the rate of benefit that's payable, and it really depends on what type of insurance people have, what that impact might be. So any income-related insurance, income replacement insurance, would be charged as income, and so we would assess that, and it would reduce the rate of main benefit that was payable. and that income limit that I talked about in terms of the cut-out rates would apply. If people have health or disability related insurance payments, which is direct reimbursement of expenses, that's not charged as income, but it may affect things like a disability allowance, which I talked about, because the extra costs that people incur may in fact be covered by those insurances. Mortgage protection insurance, which some people have, those payments are not charged as income, but they would be taken into account more when assessing the accommodation supplement. So the amount of mortgage that one has would be calculated taking off what is covered by the insurance. So yeah, the insurance would have an impact on those rates there. They would be taken into account, and we would by and large charge them as income, and in some cases they would reduce the costs that we were able to include in the assessments of what people may be eligible for.
Thank you, Linda. I know it's often said that we live in a double income economy, that it's very difficult to live on one income at all. And thinking of if your partner's earning $30,212, I wonder who in this room could actually live on $30,212 as a family for a year. I'm sure it's fairly small. And living on benefits $732.20 with everything all up for a couple, again, without insurance cover, this is what you could be on. So next we move to Linda Watling, who's from ACC. Sorry, technical claims manager from ACC, and I often think, although I'm told I'm wrong, that we're lucky to have ACC, but of course we pay for it. We pay for it, and we receive our entitlements. But I wondered if, Linda, if you could outline what somebody disabled by an accident, because we now know what somebody disabled by an illness would earn. What would somebody disabled by an accident earn in New Zealand through ACC?
Well, ACC's levies were kind of taken out of wages for self-employed, employed employees, so people generally don't notice what they're paying, but what we cover is fairly generous compared to some schemes anyway, in terms of 80% of income is covered. That's loss of earnings related compensation. So if you have an accident, there's a 1 week stand down period only. So for employed people, if there's an accident at work, the employer is required to cover that 1 week as an ACC payment, and then ACC payments kick in after that. If it's a non-work injury and you're employed, then there's a stand-down period which you'd be expected to cover through your sickness, your sick leave, or some such thing, or perhaps no payment depending on your work situation. If you're self-employed, of course, that 1 week stand-down attracts no income unless you've got money coming in still as a self-employed person. But other than the weekly compensation, there's also a lot of support around independence allowance and lump sum. Lump sum is post 1st of April 2002 in the 2001 Act. It was brought back in by the government at that time to help give people some discretionary spending around their loss in the 80 to 100% area. We cover a percentage, quite a high percentage of GP visits, treatment provider visits, transport to treatment, even I think that was mentioned a bit earlier, transport to treatment. We do provide transport to GPs, hospitals, physiotherapy, therapy assistance. It was a no-fault scheme too, I think, which is fairly important to emphasise here. ACC took away the ability for people to sue in New Zealand. In return, they get immediate cover from birth to death, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're covered. People don't realise how generous the scheme is, I don't think. We're pretty fortunate in New Zealand to have the scheme. It's unique in the world and very generous and often invisible. We fund hospitals, ambulances. There's a lot of work goes into prevention in schools, accident prevention, injury prevention. We work with sports groups. We work with the police and traffic to reduce traffic accidents. There's a lot of work that goes into the infrastructure of New Zealand to assist Kiwis in return for taking away that right to sue. So.
It's interesting. There is through no fault of the MSD. There's a big gap between what we get from ACC if we're injured and what we get if we become ill, and that gap that we're talking about is filled by the insurance industry, or should be filled if people would take out policies. It's an interesting thing is that do people understand the difference between the insurance that they're getting from ACC and benefits they get from the government if they fall ill?
There's a bit of a perception that ACC is a benefit. I think probably because both WINZ and ACC are governed by legislation, so we're very tightly monitored and regulated by legislation. But at the same time, ACC does not penalise a client for their partner's income. It's not income tested. It's very much individually assessed on the person's loss physically or financially. And they could be living with 3 people, 5 people, they could be married, unmarried. They're still assessed on what their personal individual loss is directly.
Would you like to, obviously we're a world leader in terms of accident insurance, and I'm sure there's no one here that would deny that. Would you like to see our health covered as comprehensively?
It would be great if that could happen. It would certainly help New Zealand taxpayers filling that gap. The 80 to 20% gap might be something that insurance companies could consider looking at for cover as well. Bearing in mind it's an accidental injury related insurance only. A lot of people perceive that it can cover illness as well, but it just doesn't. It doesn't. There's a lot of misperception out there around that, and people do fight very hard to keep their ACC when they realise that injuries are settling and there's maybe an illness such as diabetes or heart disease coming into play. They do fight exceptionally hard when they realise that there's going to be a difference in income at that point in time.
I've seen something very similar to that in my family where there was a shoulder injury and she was absolutely annoyed that it wouldn't be covered by ACC and that she'd have to wait X number of months, but you know, it was that lack of understanding between accident and illness. So thank you. We'll move on to Penny, who's going to from the ANZ, so Regional Manager for the ANZ. You deal with customers more more directly. Do you understand? Sorry, do they really understand they need to be prepared?
Look, I think the challenge is that it's actually really hard to understand the value of thinking about these situations until you've had a situation or someone close to you has had a situation. And society, we learn by people around us, and stories become really important for that learning. But the challenge is we've still got this stigma or this sort of social taboo about talking about money. And I love Rukingi wherever he was, he might have just snipped out. I love the fact that he asked his daughter about income protection insurance. You know, if every single parent asked their children about that, would actually be quite a big step forward. Yeah.
I know you've got some strong thoughts about how we bridge this gap, and is it just insurance?
I think the first thing is working out what's really important to you to protect your life, to protect that lifestyle, what aspect of your lifestyle is most important. And the other piece is that it changes quite regularly. So for me, my needs changed quite significantly when I had my first child, and we needed to think differently about not only if my husband and I are ill, but what happens if Claudia is ill, and Diana talked a little bit about that before. Insurance is a really good option, but it's not the only option that we should be talking to our customers about. It's things like building up that emergency fund, it's potentially being prepared to sell an investment property, but both of those options, there's a time element to it. So to build up an emergency fund, that takes time, and it assumes that you've got some discretionary income that you can put aside. So insurance may be a good option for those customers that can't build that up. And the other problem that I see often with property investors is the theory that they can sell off an investment property, particularly in Auckland, to release some of that equity. But I had an example a couple of years ago when my ideal was that I'd sell my investment property to pay for my maternity cover, to have my year off, put my house on the market. I didn't get one offer. So it wasn't an option about selling for, getting to a happy point between a vendor and seller. I didn't have anyone to buy my property. So, and we don't talk about those situations enough. Yeah.
I think you have plans and they don't necessarily come to fruition.
That's right.
Yeah. So moving on to Naomi, who's our other industry representative here. Look, we know that there's a huge number of products out there. And I, in fact, when I write about them, get confused. And even though I know what all these products are, I'm confused to where they sit. You know, I wrote a piece recently about, some of you will know about the Countdown bill insurance. They're supermarket insurance that covers your shopping whilst you're ill. And, you know, at first of all, I thought, well, this isn't really insurance, but it is. And it may only be a small amount for people, but it actually gives them something to live on. And so products like that are probably important for people who can't afford the bells and whistles that we think they should have. But I'm wandering off the point there a bit. So we often hear about critical illness cover, TPD, and mortgage repayment. Do you mind just giving us a breakdown for those in the audience who don't know about them, what these products are and what they actually do?
Yeah, it's interesting because we talked about trauma insurance or critical insurance earlier in association with income protection insurance, and I saw a number of people around the audience go, what? They're not the same thing. But actually, critical illness is a lump sum payment if someone suffers from one of the specific illnesses. So for some people, you could see them believing that a lump sum payment if I have an illness will allow me some time before my income needs to kick back in. There's also people who get confused about medical insurance and also equate that to a form of income protection. And I guess it is in the sense that medical insurance allows you to get your treatment quickly and get private treatment and get different optional treatment than you otherwise would publicly, so you can get back to work sooner. But actually those things are specific types of covers for specific purposes. The lump sum is a one-off. You've been paid it, it's done. And then if you don't go back to work, in a period of time you may find yourself with a big gap similar to your savings. If you use your savings and then you're still not back at work, when you run out, that's a major problem. Or alternatively, you have multiple illnesses over your lifetime and you've used up your savings already, or you've sold your property and it's gone and you've lost your income again. So the sorts of disability income or income protection type products that we sort of are concentrating on here are the ones that just replace your income when you're sick, and there's no specific list of causes that make you sick. It's if you get sick, this is what we do. It covers you for as long as you're off, with some restrictions around some choices of payment term, but it's a long-term benefit coverage, and then when you go back to work, you continue to be covered for the next time. So the sorts of income protection products I guess we're talking to are the ones that allow you to continue to live because your income's been replaced, as opposed to your income stopped, here's another form of money that may or may not trigger depending on what you're sick from. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Obviously, the products are often aimed at middle and high income earners, but lower income earners often have more of a need for them. Do you mind commenting on the affordability of the products?
Yeah, again, I think that's a myth that they're designed for sort of middle to high income people. They're actually designed for people who will lose an income and suffer financially if they get sick. And there's a misconception about the sorts of pricing that's charged. And I did a little quote quickly, one of our own quotes. For mum and dad, both on $50,000 each. He's a self-employed builder, she's a teacher. They're both 35, so young kids, perfect sort of age to be worrying about insurance. And with a 4-week wait, so that's because you said that's as long as they can hang around, and a 2-year payment term for each disability. It's only $25 a week for those people. If you extend out the waiting period and make the payment term 1 year instead of 2 years for each disability, you're down to $12 a week. It's affordable, and that's a full bells and whistles income protection policy. You can restructure. You don't have to cover the whole of your income with an income protection product. You can just cover what you think you desperately need to survive while you're ill, so you can reduce the amount of cover. There are other types of products, the ones that cover your mortgage only, so you take the strain of your mortgage payments off the family in the event of illness. Mortgage protection covers. There's bill protection or household expensive type benefits that cover your bills if you're sick. So you can structure in a lot of ways. You can change the waiting period, make it longer, which makes it cheaper. You can change the payment terms. Some companies even offer payment terms as short as 3 months. So it'll cover you for any one illness for 3 months. If you're willing to have at least some cover rather than none, that's incredibly cheap in terms of the type of cover. So actually I don't think that conception is right. The problem is we haven't communicated that well enough so that people don't have this perception that, oh, those types of benefits are too expensive for me.
That's actually really interesting, and I'm often being attacked by readers because I dare say that people could spend less. I'm told over and over again that New Zealand's a low income economy and nobody has any spare money. But I'm sure that a lot of people can find $12 a week or $25 a week with ease. I mean, you know, just cutting down on their phone expenses, for example, they can save money. So it's even for people like me, it's complex. It's complex, and you know, when I took out income protection insurance, because I read every last detail, it took a lot to work through it.
Yeah.
How do we go about finding out what people's needs are, and how they address those needs?
I think that's a really interesting thing, and this Mind the Gap seminar and this type of publicity is exactly what we need to raise awareness for people about the concept of the product, kind of affordability of it. So this kind of exercise is really important to start to get people to think differently. But actually, for the most part, this is still a product that needs to be sold, and both of the people sitting here who had the product talked about it being sold. They need to understand why they need it. So the facts that are coming out of this seminar are fantastic for that. And then they need to understand how to structure it to best fit their affordability, their needs, the types of bells and whistles that are applicable to them that they want. And so that really leads us to say we need more people talking to people about these products. We need more people in banks talking to them. We need more advisors out in the marketplace talking to them. We need more people talking to people about what we do. And this kind of information, I think, helps those people to do their job.
I think this website would be helpful as well in terms of just getting information out to people. A question from the floor to Linda Smarden. Linda, can you please restate clearly the level of a partner's income at which no main benefit would be payable?
Sure. So that was for the job seeker benefit, and the example that we were using was a couple with 2 children. The cut-out point for the main benefit is $30,212 gross. Could I just add perhaps to that, the supplementary assistance that people may be able to still get, so the accommodation supplement, there are different income cut-out limits for that. So for that area 1 that we talked about before, it's $77,012 gross, and that's down to a lower level of $45,812 gross, just depending on where people live. So people could have an income over $30,000, and there may be some financial assistance that we would be able to assess for them, and we would do that looking at their circumstances case by case.
I have some questions for Linda Watling from ACC. First of all, the 80% up to what's the maximum income that's up to? So there is a ceiling for that.
The ceiling for paying the 80% is, I think, it's around $88,000 per annum, and the maximum weekly compensation payable is also at about $1,800, I think, per week. So if you're earning over that particular amount of money, if you want to be paid the difference, you need to insure that extra, because we only insure up to that particular amount.
So my reader who claims that he can't save $150,000 is going to be in the proverbial if he ends up on ACC. Can you please explain the importance of Cover Plus Extra for self-employed clients?
Cover Plus Extra, it's one that self-employed clients can actually pick. They can choose the cover, but generally it's related to the previous 3 years' income, so that they can't just decide they're going to take a pie in the sky cover of $200,000, insure $200,000 worth of income if they've only earned, say, $50,000 or $60,000 a year over the last 3 years on average. So ACC will be generous and allow them to cover a little bit higher, but in case of higher earnings in their business, but it's generally realistic in terms of what people are expected to pay and what they can choose.
I was on ACC about 2 years ago from a cycling accident, and it was interesting because I'd chosen not to take Cover Plus Extra, and because I have savings, and when the amount came through, because of course it was 80% of what I declared to the government as to Inland Revenue as my income, and when the payments came through each week, they looked quite small. but I'd listened to Penny and I had savings. ACC, as well, please clarify the issues around the understanding of degenerative diseases.
Have we got all day? There's a little bit of, obviously, a bit of press around that. Degenerative diseases are not covered by ACC. They're not considered to be an injury. However, under work-related gradual process disease and infection legislation, people can be covered for disease or infection which occurs in the course of their work. For instance, I guess industrial asthma is one that springs to mind if people have had to work around chemicals, or like car painters who have maybe been exposed to a little bit of fumes. It's considered to be a degenerative disease, but it's covered because it occurred as a result of your workplace activity. But degeneration such as arthritis, osteoarthritis, generally happens over time and based on age and also predisposition and genetics. So it's a fine line at times, but it's generally not covered.
If I just add to that, the thing about income protection type insurances is that it doesn't exclude accidents. So because we have ACC, income protection doesn't say you're not covered for accidents. It just offsets what you receive from ACC. So if they don't cover you for as much as you think you should be, and we base it on your accounts, not what you declared to the tax department, or if it's degenerative, for example, then your insurance just covers all of it, as opposed to none of it. So it's really important to understand that it's not a not accident cover. It covers accidents and illnesses. It just offsets anything, and that's how we keep the price down. So you don't get paid twice for the same thing. But you can certainly get paid for things that you're not paid for under ACC.
I have to say, for the record, that I got from ACC what I expected, and I was very grateful for it.
Yes.
But it was just simply when I simply sat down, and because I was in bed for 7 weeks, so I sat down and looked at the figures and thought, how on earth does your average person live on that? But that, of course, was that, like many self-employed people in this room, that our income on paper doesn't look great. So I'm just interested, Penny, just asked you another question about people come into the bank how many people do actually have decent-sized emergency funds?
It's fair to say not many. But the challenge is, I was talking before about it's hard to think about the what if and the negative mindset. It's very easy to think about the pool and the bathroom that you can use with your increasing Auckland property prices. And we see that a lot, and my ideal would be when a customer comes in to talk about that top-up or wanting to do a renovation, that every banker and every advisor is asking them about what if you aren't able to work for 6 months? What happens then? Are you able to maintain what's important to you? And that one conversation is usually enough to help the customer prioritise the plan, but it may take a couple of conversations for the plan to actually get into place.
And I was just interested, Naomi, in one thing that you said that I've never thought about as somebody with an emergency fund was that there might be multiple incidents. And do you see this happening quite often?
Yeah, well, the cover covers people generally till they're age 65. So if you're a 35-year-old and take out this cover, there's a fairly high chance you will have multiple periods of time off work for more than sort of 4 weeks over that period of time. And that is the advantage of these types of products. And also, they increase over time with CPI indexation, etc., to try to keep track with your changing income. Whereas a lump sum paid once when you're 40 doesn't necessarily do the job for you through to age 65.
No. Just a question here. What is the maximum payment term for an ACC claim for Linda? And Linda, somebody else texted to say they couldn't hear you.
Oh, for the maximum?
Yes.
For a receipt or?
So the maximum payment term, but if you could just speak up a little bit for somebody who
Okay.
needs to hear.
The maximum insured wage income is around 88,000
I think the question was the term, so for how long can you be on ACC for?
Oh, until such time as we've helped you to recover and return to work or independence. It's not a finite payment period. ACC is required to work with each client to help them return to independence and work, and that can actually include work-ready programs to help them become ready for work again, activity-based programs around being fit for work, depending on the type of work people have been doing. So there's no term as such. It goes on for as long as necessary until such time someone has recovered.
And what happens at age 65? Because we've talked earlier about people between 65 and 75 still working. So if I'm age 70 and I'm earning 60,000 a year, am I still entitled to ACC?
Yes, believe it or not. If you've been on ACC for more than 2 years and then you get to the age of 65, then you are required to retire at 65. But if you're over 65 and you're working, you have an injury, you have a period of time when you are able to get ACC for 12 months, and then following that you can elect to receive ACC or National Super after that. And then after that 2-year period, you go back onto the National Super rate or back to work, whatever's the case here.
Thank you. In the absence of any more questions, I will wrap up this section. I'd like you to join me in thanking Linda, Penny, and And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Peter.
I'll just go back to the start of the presentation.
Oh, thank you. Michael's technically challenged about
All the way at the start. Yeah, so we just want to go right to the start and then bring up that's the one. Perfect. Yep. And just bring it full screen.
Right. Okay, well, we've had a rather busy morning. I think we've learnt a lot. It's nice to have the combination of both the statistical base but also the personal experiences, because basically we need, as humans, to know the stories as well as the facts. And equally, they're all part of that problem that we have, which is how do we have more conversations? And I think that we're trying to say from this day, we've basically got better material for better conversations, talking to people about why they need the particular product. The question mark is not when you have that open up the conversation. As soon as people hear those facts and that information, they recognise that they do actually need it. But the problem at the moment is, by and large, we don't know that we have this problem, the vulnerability that exists. So what else is there coming out of today? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of the sponsors as well as all of the speakers and Diana. But I also want to remind you about what's coming up. On the screen, we have the mock-ups of what the website will look like. There is also going to be a guide to effectively what happens when illness prevents you from earning an income. And that will be obviously helpful advice for people who are in this room in terms of those conversations that you have on a day-by-day basis. We've also got the fact sheet that was available, distributed to you. That will be available on our website today, as well as the presentation from Grant McKinnon. That will be also available later today for anybody to be able to use and take into a different context and use that same material. And also we'll be following up with that online campaign between January and about March of next year that will be basically highlighting the facts that exist here and inviting people to visit that website. In other words, so we're trying to make sure that that conversation is occurring. It doesn't just happen today. There will be some editorial coverage, there will be some media coverage of the survey material, but we will be repeating those messages throughout the first part of next year so that it does coordinate with the activity of the industry in order to actually bring those conversations and for people to actually look at those products. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for all of those sponsors who made it possible. Thank you for coming. Thank you for all the speakers, and join us for an enjoyable lunch and starting off some of those conversations. Thank you.
Pardon?
We got there in time?
We did, yep.
Yeah,
exactly 2 minutes too.
They were good.